Hi everyone, welcome to Herosner podcast. I'm your host Vik Aslanyan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Mike Balyan, where we dive into our great Armenian history and discuss different eras, kingdoms, and topics, and great people. This is episode 3. It is a live recording. We are also on Clubhouse. Our topic is the history of Artsakh, actually the ancient history of Artsakh. And our guest is a great historian from Armenia, Gevork Nazaryan. How are you, Gevork?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Yeah. We're excited. We want to cover this topic because it's so important, especially what's going on now. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and talk about yourself, what your background is, how you ended up, studying history and so forth.
Great. Thank you. I'm, as you said, a historian, and I'm actually based in LA, but for the last few years, I've been living in Armenia, in our homeland, and I have been doing research here, academic research on Armenian history in the archives here in Armenia. Obviously I found out that you guys have launched this amazing show dedicated to Armenian history through a mutual friend, and I was more than happy to be part of it. And I suggested us doing this show on the history of Artsakh because it's so pertinent to what is going on today with Armenia and the war that we just, it's actually was a very recent thing that, we faced off against this Azeri aggression and, over Artsakh. And unfortunately, as you guys know, it's still very much an ongoing thing because, our borders are still being violated every day. So, I actually suggested of us, doing something on the ancient history of Artsakh because unfortunately the Azeris have been falsifying so much of that history. I guess that's as an intro to what we're going to cover on the history of Artsakh.
Great. And talk a little bit about your background. Like how when did you start studying history, and what made you go into the Armenian history?
Right. Well, I've been fascinated with Armenian history since childhood, and I actually decided to go into Armenian history from early age. I completed my BA and MA in Armenian history and Armenian studies in UCLA. And then I continued my PhD studies here in Armenia a few years ago, as I said, working in the archives because I've been researching on the Armenian question, and there are a lot of documents on the Armenian question that, as you guys know, it's very much related to Armenian genocide and what happened at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. So there are a lot of documents in different languages here in the local National Archive of Armenia. So I've decided to, dedicate a few years to that endeavor. But as I said, I'm very much interested in all different periods of Armenian history, including our origins, ancient history, Kingdom of Van, Ararat, and all the way to the present times.
Of course. Those are definitely areas that we're going to be covering. Our goal is to dissect our history as much as possible, and every episode dive deep into, like I said, kingdoms, certain people, events that took place. So we have a lot of work to do.
And there's so much of actual world history that ties into so many of the events from that time era, 2-3 millennia ago.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Well,
Absolutely.
we have a lot to cover, so let's dive into kind of like the beginning. I know that if you go back all the way to the Armenian highlands before kingdoms, the natives, as you could call them, that lived in that area, they knew them as the Kura Araxes civilization, which was that kind of inhabited that area. when was Artsakh first mentioned in historical records?
That's very good question. I mean, the earliest written sources that we have mentioning Artsakh in its cuneiform form are from the 8th century BC by King Sarduri II of Kingdom of Van Ararat, also known as Urartu, as you guys know. So that's the earliest time. And what is interesting is basically King Sarduri notes that Artsakh is actually, he basically states that it's an important eastern flank of his kingdom. So, and that's like a cuneiform early mentioning of Artsakh in the form of Artakh or Urdehi. You know, it depends how you actually read the cuneiform, but it's the earliest mentioning that we have of the name Artsakh, the historic Armenian name of this region from the 8th century BC. You can say almost 3,000 years ago in a written inscription. But as you rightly noted, Vahe, the Armenian presence, in form of the Kuro-Araxes civilization is much earlier, dated to 2nd, 3rd, 4th millennia BC. So basically, our presence has been there from prehistoric times, but the first mentioning in the written inscriptions that we have is still pretty archaic if you think about it. I mean, 3,000 years ago, you have the name, a variation of the name Artsakh written in the cuneiform inscriptions of King Sarduri II. It's quite amazing, actually.
Interestingly enough, I mean, Vic knows I'm a history buff myself, and just recently, of course, being more opened up to Armenian history, I've discovered in my personal venture that history is a set of lies agreed upon. So you have a lot of falsifications out there, depending on what part of the world you look at, whether it's Armenian history or whatnot. And my question to you is, with so many falsifications, with mainstream narratives, what have we been taught in schools or lack thereof that are Armenian sources and non-Armenian sources, and what the differences are between those sources, let's say, that provide said information? Does that make any sense?
Right, it does. I mean, you make a good point, Mike, actually. This is the thing. Like, unfortunately, when we're dealing with the history of Artsakh, obviously, since the issue is so politicized, the Azeris have been, very adamant in falsifying that part of Armenian history. So it's very important for us to actually first and foremost use non-Armenian sources to outline that, actually Artsakh being part of Armenia is first and foremost recorded in these ancient non-Armenian sources, Greek and Roman primarily, because as you guys know, during the classical times, these were the two important civilizations, the Greeks followed by the Romans, sometimes collectively referred to as the Greco-Roman sources. So, and when we actually look at the evidence, Mike, we see that, these classical historians, geographers, scholars, they actually, repeat and state that Artsakh is part of Armenia, and Artsakh, as well as bordering provinces of a province of Utik and Paitakaran, those were the three main provinces, are actually forming a border between Armenia and the neighboring kingdom of Albania, or sometimes referred to as Caucasian Albania. And these historians and these scholars, namely Strabo, Pliny the Elder, Ptolemy, Plutarch, Dio Cassius, and others, these are Greek and Roman scholars from 1st century BC all the way to 2nd, 3rd century AD. They state that Artsakh, which in the Greco-Roman inscriptions, they actually use the Greco-Roman name Orchistene, is a province of Armenia, and Armenia extends all the way to the Kur or Kura River. So this is a very important thing, that they actually note that the border of Armenia and neighboring state of Albania is the Kura River, which includes the territory of Artsakh. So you made a great point that we have these important sources that actually state that Artsakh is part, an inseparable part of Armenia.
And again, just a quick follow-up question to that, I guess more for conversation's sake, is when you have these written inscriptions in cuneiform that proved that Artsakh was a part of our culture, and there's even DNA that's proved that we are a part of this land for what, 4,000 or 5,000 years, maybe even further back, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
how easy is it? And this is my personal question to you: is how easy is it for someone like, let's say, Azerbaijan or Turkey or whoever else to suppress this kind of information with the international community? You have so many people, so many scholars from so many different places around the globe that do excavations and archaeological findings for their own research, Brits, British, Italians, Germans, etc. But yet you have one or two powers, let's say lack thereof, for, I don't want to call them powers, but they're kind of suppressing all of this information.
Right. Well, in academia, even in Western academia, it's much harder for the Azeris to actually falsify history. But unfortunately, they have been using the power of the so-called purse to actually advance their interest. Just recently, unfortunately, we heard that through the Aliyev Fund, which Ilham Aliyev has established in Baku, they offered money to Oxford University to advance so-called Azeri studies and things like that. So you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, using these, financial perks, they're actually trying to subvert history, the historic narrative, and basically subvert academic integrity to their own ends. But I have to be honest. I think for most part, a lot of the academics that have standards and integrity, they obviously refuse to follow what Aliyev would dictate. So, but unfortunately, there are others who would be willing, like a lower tier kind of scholarly set that would actually take that money and actually falsify history. But I think it's actually to the credit of these high-end universities, these Ivy League in the States universities that would never actually take money and actually discredit the name of their own educational establishment to just for the sake of few $1 million. But this is a problem that we have been facing for the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
Azeris and Turks.
Yeah. Well, their whole narrative with these Caucasian Albania, first of all, the Caucasian Albanians have been extinct for a very long time. And even their people, the you can call them descendants of which they call themselves the Udis. There's such a small population in Azerbaijan that themselves, there's only 10,000 of them in the entire world. So, they need some kind of a narrative to push their agenda. But, fortunately, there's so much information out there. But like you said, the biggest problem is right now with these powers with money and influence, they're able to push this forward, and we have to fight back. And the only way to do that is to educate everybody, including our own. Everybody needs to know our history. It is so important. Once we know our history, then nobody can argue with us. It could be a social environment. It could be gatherings, anything. When this topic comes up, you are prepared. You have all the ammunition to, fight them with it, basically.
And it's been coming up a lot over the last year.
Right.
A lot.
That's what I usually say. Truth and evidence is on our side. We just have to know it, The Azeris, Aliyev is going to try to basically falsify and use all kinds of tricks. But if you're versed in historic facts and truth of the matter, you're not gonna have any issues with that.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's very important that basically we understand that these important facts with regards to classical historians outlining that, Artsakh and the border of the Kingdom of Greater Armenia and Caucasian Albania was the Kur River, which completely included the province of Artsakh.
Yeah.
And Strabo actually mentions, he says that, all of Greater Armenia is Armenian speaking and populated by Armenian speakers, Armenians. He even makes that point, so it's not only politically within Armenia, but it's Armenian populated.
Yeah.
As you guys know, Strabo is considered the, father of geography. His 1st century BC, 1st century AD, a Greek geographer, historian. So that's a very important evidence that we should actually use to, educate.
And also, I think from the research we've done, even during the reign of Alexander the Great, that there's mentions of actually Artsakh.
Yeah.
Right.
And because they ruled that area.
Yes. As I said, Greco-Roman sources. So you can say, like, with the start of the Hellenic influence in the 4th century BC, all the way, until the fall of the Kingdom of Greater Armenia in the 5th century AD, these a number of sources actually mention, it's Armenian populated region.
Now to kind of the second part question, what Mike asked was, we talk about the non-Armenian sources that talk about the borders of Artsakh and just historical Armenia, but what about within Armenia? What do ancient Armenian sources tell us about our own borders from Armenia?
Yeah, that's a good point. We have our own sources actually note that, the Kingdom of Greater Armenia was divided into 15 provinces. We have Khorenatsi, we have different Pastos, Byzant, and other, Armenian classical historians from the 5th century AD and the following periods. And they actually are very much clear that, Greater Armenia was divided into 15 provinces. And Artsakh was actually the 10th province of the Kingdom of Greater Armenia. So they actually basically repeat what the Greek and Roman sources tell us, that Artsakh was an important province of Greater Armenia. And not only was just a province, but it was an important Armenian cultural and learning center, because Mesrop Mashtots, after he actually revived the use of the Armenian alphabet, he basically established the first Armenian school in Artsakh. He established it in the monastery of Amaras after 405 AD. So he basically began the revival in 405 AD for the use of the Armenian alphabet, and he actually established his first learning center in Artsakh. Can you guys imagine? That means, like, Artsakh was not only just a constituent province of Armenia, but it was an important province of Armenia. I mean, it was an important educational, cultural, spiritual center of Armenia. You can argue even the heart of Armenia, that he actually decided to establish his first learning center, Mesrop Mashtots, in Artsakh, in the monastery of Amaras. Which luckily is still, even today, it's Armenian controlled. We retained control of that southern Artsakh region when Hadrut fell to the advancing Azeri aggression.
Now let's kind of go a little bit further. Like, what was the historic course of Artsakh? Let's say during the Middle Age. Middle Ages.
Right. As I said, basically, it was a very important province of Armenia, and it remained so until the 5th century. And in the 5th century, the Kingdom of Greater Armenia unfortunately fell in 428 AD. The Arshakuni dynasty, which was the ruling dynasty of Greater Armenia, actually fell, and Armenia was converted by neighboring Iran, Sasanian Iran, into one of its provinces, but actually it retained sort of like a semi-autonomous rule. So basically Armenia was ruled by local rulers, but it was basically kind of like within the influence of Sasanian Iran after 428 AD. And this is the time when in Artsakh proper as well, local Armenian princes, basically they were the rulers of this land under this overall Iranian suzerainty. They were the rulers of Artsakh. And these Armenian kings known as Aran Shahiks, this was the dynasty that ruled. Dynasty, yeah, they ruled Artsakh.
So Vachagan the Devout, right? He was
exactly. Yes, Vachagan the Devout. He was one of the Aran Shahi kings in the 5th century AD. So yeah, and this lasted basically until the 7th century, when Iran, in its turn, and also Armenia as well, was invaded by the Arabs, and again, the status of local Armenian rulers remained unchanged, but basically it was under the caliphate. The Arab caliphate basically switched from Iranian rule to the Arab caliphate, but locally, still Artsakh was ruled by the local Armenian princes from this Aran Shahi dynasty.
Now, during that time, also, it's good to mention that Artsakh was part of during the whole battle with Vartan Mamikonian. They actually did join and help. And after the obviously it was a loss, but in theory we did a lot of damage to them. They actually took in a lot of the soldiers and warriors and kept them, they hid them, because obviously they were after them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously the period in 451 AD that you talk about, when Vartan Mamikonian was the supreme commander of the armed forces of Armenia, rebelled against this Iranian rule to overthrow this basically Sasanian yoke. Artsakh, being a constituent part of Armenia, also like Artsakh nobles joined forces with Vartan Mamikonian, and they actually played a decisive role in the Battle of Avarayt in 451 AD, in May of 451 AD, in the ensuing Vartanant's war against Iranian domination. And, in 480s, the Armenians actually, were able to restore their local rule in the Vahanant's war. So basically what Vartan Mamikonian began, this, national liberation struggle, was completed by his successor Vahan Mamikonian in 480s with the Treaty of Nevarsak with the Persians, under which Armenia retained its autonomy. So basically, Armenia was to be ruled by local Armenian governors and princes, but within this sort of recognizing Iranian influence, but ruled locally. And Artsakh, as you rightly noted, the nobles of Artsakh also are recorded by our ancient classical sources are as playing a vital role in this national liberation struggle.
Now, I also, as we dive into the next question, before we do that, everyone on Clubhouse, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you up. You can ask your question to Gevork directly.
So, Gevork, you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to ask a question about, is after the 4th or 5th century AD, when, Artsakh kind of that area established itself after the Battle of Avarayt. What is the cultural and historical significance of Artsakh within Armenian history in that area? Like when you said Mesrop Mashtots kind of established a school there in the 5th century, what began to develop during this time in terms of education and in terms of cultural impact? Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, Artsakh, when we look at the medieval Armenian surviving sources and even manuscripts, we see that Artsakh plays an important cultural role in the history of Armenia. So, obviously, if you have a school that is established by Mesrop Mashtots, you're going to have scholars they're prepared for all of the monasteries and learning centers of Armenia. So Artsakh served as an important cultural learning center for all of Armenia. The scholars that were educated in Amaras Monastery which even today is a site of pilgrimage for many Armenians worldwide, it was this learning center that the scholars, the theologians, and what have you, all these pupils that graduated from the Amaras monastery later on basically spread all over Armenia and became important, lights in their own right. So obviously, the fact that Artsakh was not only a constituent part of Armenia, but was the heart of cultural, spiritual, life of ancient Armenia is documented through this evidence. And we have some of the most amazing khachkars, manuscripts from Artsakh and adjoining Armenian provinces, because sometimes we also include the Utik province, which was one of the provinces to the north of Artsakh, also as Artsakh, but actually it was a province in its own right and with its own rich cultural heritage. Unfortunately, today, again, devoured and depopulated of its native Armenian population by the Azeris. The last Armenians from Utik were deported between 1988 and 1990, which is north of Artsakh.
This is the Shahum, or otherwise known as Shahuman province, no?
Shahuman and Mike, and a little bit even north of Shahuman. Okay. Ganzak. Yes. It's known as Gardman also. I don't know if you heard of the Gardman province. We had a lot of villages there. It's north of Artsakh, north of Getashen, north of Shahuman. We had hundreds of villages, Armenian villages, that were deported of its native, Gardman population, Armenian population, when the first clashes began between Armenians and the Azeris. So, unfortunately, has been devoured of Armenians ever since. But, returning back to your original question, you're absolutely right. Artsakh, all the evidence pinpoints that was very important, crucial learning center of ancient Armenia.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned about like the clashes with the Azeris and just in general Armenians and Azeris, the question I have for you is, when did the first Turkic tribes kind of started moving in and settle in the Artsakh area, basically in general?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the first Turkic tribes invaded just Armenia and our region in general at large, starting in the 11th century. But they never actually penetrated the mountainous area of specifically Artsakh. So starting in the 11th and subsequent centuries, they actually established their presence in the valleys and the flatlands adjoining Artsakh, but never Artsakh mountainous parts of Artsakh, which is a very mountainous area. They didn't establish themselves even at that time. And believe it or not, it wasn't until the 18th century, when for the first time the ancestors of today's, Azeris, who at that time weren't called Azeris, I hope maybe we'll have, a chance to talk about the name Azeri and where it comes from and how it relates to so-called present Azeri people, But, they established themselves, these Turkic tribes, as late as, can you imagine, 18th century, mid-18th century. This is the first time that they established themselves in parts of Shushi and what have you. Before that, they actually migrated from the east, from the territory known as Altai, which is like in Central Asia, Southern Russia area, adjoining Siberia. So the ancestors of the Turkic tribes, who were a nomadic people, they migrated in the 11th century, starting in the 11th century, and the migrations continued well into the late Middle Ages. These people from the Altai region of Central Asia, they started their invasions and migrations into our region. But like I said, they first of all, they established themselves in the valleys. They didn't establish themselves in the mountainous areas of Artsakh and otherwise. And it wasn't as late as the mid-18th century, we're talking about around 250 years ago, that the ancestors of present-day Azeris were actually established themselves in places in Artsakh proper.
Now, you mentioned, I mean, you can elaborate, like, how did they end up, how did they come up with the name Azeris? Like, how did they, decide that this is what we're going to be called?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The name Azeri actually, it's a Arabic Islamic version of the name Atropatene, which in like Arabic and Islamic literature was cited as Azerbaijan or Azerbaijan. And Atropatene is first recorded in the 4th century BC, 4th century BC, when one of the Medes were an ancient, Iranian people. One of the Mede generals, governors of Media, that was the name of the region, south of the Artakh River, which is today northern Iran, in this area, northwestern Iran to be actually specific.
Which is also referred to as Azerbaijan territory.
Azerbaijan, exactly.
Yeah, with
exactly,
a different
Mike.
pronunciation, correct?
You're making a great point. This is the real Azerbaijan.
Okay.
But in 1918, I know maybe we're jumping a little bit forward, but
sorry.
I know. No, it's okay.
Getting a little excited.
It's important to actually, put it in its context. When in 1918, Turks invaded Armenia, and actually a Turkish general by the name of Nuri Pasha, who was a brother of Enver Pasha, one of the mass organizers of the Armenian genocide. He actually invaded Armenia, and he had this pan-Turkish ideology of uniting all the Turkic-speaking peoples into one huge Turan, this sort of Turkic empire ruled by Turkey, known as Turan. So this Nuri Pasha, who was actually brother of one of the 3 main organizers of the Armenian genocide, Enver Pasha, he actually suggested to these, so-called Azerbaijanis, before that they were known as Turks or simply Tatars, he suggested to them that, let's name your newly created republic north of Artakh River, as incorporating parts of historic Armenia and historic Albania, which had nothing to do with the Turkic people. Let's name this area north of Artakh River as Azerbaijan, and then you can actually claim that the real Azerbaijan, which is south of Artakh River, is also part of this greater Azerbaijan, and we can actually incorporate it into this so-called firstly proclaimed in 1918 Republic of Azerbaijan, and then make this huge country as part of our newly created Turkic empire. So this Turkish general by the name of Nuri Pasha is actually the one who coined this erroneous and false term of Azerbaijan for this territory. And what is interesting to note, Iran, the government of Iran in August of 1918, this so-called Azerbaijani Republic with the appropriated name of historic Iranian province, which never was part of this territory, actually the Iranian government sent a note of protest to the Turkish government, to the so-called newly proclaimed Azeri government in August of 1918, saying that you basically appropriated the name of our ancient Iranian province, which has nothing to do with your so-called Republic of Azerbaijan, which you had just proclaimed for the first time in history. So this is, again, a very important and crucial element of history that we have to constantly repeat, because like even the name Azerbaijan was appropriated from Iran, which has nothing to do with this territory north of the Artakh River, and is today used by, these people. Before that, the Azeris were known as Turks, Turkics, just simply Muslims, Tatars. If you look at the ancient censuses, when different nationalities and people are listed, you would never see like a nationality or a country by the name of Azerbaijan. Never, ever.
Yeah, they were a mixture of, so many different people, and there wasn't anybody that was specifically dominant over the other. It was almost like you had I mean, I lack for a better word, trying to be a little funny. It was like a salad bowl of people that they just brought in or migrated into the area, correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like even the name Azeri wasn't used until 1936. For the first time, the name Azeri was used in Stalin's constitution for a nationality. Before that, if you look all of the censuses, they're listed by various names. The so-called Azeri people of today, they were listed by different other names. They were never listed as Azeri. They were listed as Turks, Turkics, Tatars. That was one of the name that, the Russian government assigned to them, Tatars, like as a Turkic people. They even used the name Muslim. I know it's like a religious connotation, but for them, even like as a nationality and language, it was used Muslim people, simply Muslim people living in the area, adjoining the Caspian Sea. That was the designation because, there wasn't a specific name for these people. And like you said, the salad bowl of people, you had the Talish, the Tats, which are Iranian people. They're like Farsi speaking, Iranian speaking people. They were also listed as Azeris. Can you imagine, like these people, like the Tats, the Talish, these people were in the millions, and they were simply after 1936 by Stalin's orders, all these people were listed as so-called Azerbaijanis. But before that, you had all these like different Caucasian people, like the Lezgins, like the Avars, and other people that, were distinct. All these people today in Aliyev's so-called Azerbaijan are today listed as Azeris. But, they have, their roots are very much different from each other.
Now, leading into my next question, since we're in this time period, kind of backing up a little bit too, and then we can kind of come back to the time era that we're speaking of now. I want to know a little bit more about how the Russian Empire had their impact on the region between Artsakh, Armenia, what is now known as Georgia, and what's now known as Azerbaijan. How did that play such a significant role in the 19th and 20th century?
Right. So, Russia, basically, the history of Russian presence in South Caucasus begins in early 19th century when, Russian Empire expanded and conquered South Caucasus in early 19th century and established itself. It actually, first of all, annexed what is Georgia, and later moved on to, like you said, what is today Azerbaijan, but also including Armenian Artsakh. So Armenian Artsakh was incorporated in 1813 in the Russian Empire by the Treaty of Gulistan. The Treaty of Gulistan signed in 1813 between the Russian Tsar, Nicholas I, and the Shah of Iran, the Persian Shah. So because, it was a Perso-Russian war, and the Russian side was the victorious side, and they actually annexed South Caucasus, including Eastern Armenia, into the Russian Empire. And what is interesting to note, Mike, that Russian sources are very much clear that Artsakh was still, even during this time, it was ruled by local Armenian nobles known as the Meliks, the Armenian Meliks. So specifically, there were 5 Armenian princedoms known as Melikdoms. Melik is basically like a king or a prince, So these 5 Armenian princedoms ruled the territory of Artsakh. So when the Russians actually, conquered this territory and won, Artsakh still, this semi-autonomous Armenian rule over Artsakh had remained by these Meliks. And it basically only terminated with this final incorporation of Artsakh and this Utik and all these Armenian populated areas into the Russian province. So the Russian presence begins during this time, and according to these 2 important treaties, Treaty of Gulistan and Treaty of Turkmenchai, signed in 1813 and 1828 respectively, Russia became the master of South Caucasus, and the border between Iran and the Russian Empire was the Artakh River. So Artakh River became the borderline between, Russian presence in South Caucasus, including Eastern Armenia and Iran. That's when the Russian, presence firmly established itself and remained so until you can say the, Russian Revolution of 1917.
Now, speaking of borders, what were the borders of the Republic of Armenia and Azerbaijan when the latter country was established in history, basically for the first time in 1918?
Right. So basically, as I said, Russian Empire remained intact until 1917. And then after the Russian Revolution, which happened in Russia, actually, there were two revolutions. One was in February of 1917, and they had the provisional government, and that was followed by the Bolshevik takeover in November of the same year, 1917. So basically, the collapse of Russia created this instability, and all the countries of the South Caucasus, namely, Armenia, Georgia, and for the first time in history, proclaimed so-called Republic of Azerbaijan with the appropriated Iranian name, as we talked about, suggested by Nuri Pasha, this pan-Turkist genocide general, brother of Enver Pasha, who orchestrated the Armenian genocide. So these three republics proclaimed their independence because of the turmoil of Russia taking place in Russia and the Russian Revolution. So this was in May of 1918. So when this happened, Artsakh Armenians also said that, they obviously they are going to be part of the newly proclaimed Republic of Armenia. So at this time, this is a very important point, that, Artsakh was still 95% Armenian populated region. So not only historically it was an Armenian territory, but still in terms of its demographics, it had a 95% Armenian population. So obviously the Armenians of Artsakh, they, obviously said, we're going to be with the Republic of Armenia. But unfortunately, from the get-go, the Azeri side, the Azeris, they said, no, we're going to annex this territory. We're going to basically extend our influence as much as we can. And they said, Artsakh is also part of, our territory. And this is, you can say that, these are the roots of modern conflict that we have with the Azeri side, because, the Artsakh Armenians said that we have a right to self-determine our own future as Armenians. We're living on the territory of Armenia, and we want to be part of the Republic of Armenia. But the Azeris, simply out of nowhere, they didn't, they didn't have the numbers. Historically, this was not Azerbaijan, but obviously they just wanted to, extend their influence as much as they can and incorporate as much as Armenian territory in their newly proclaimed republic as they could. So they said, no, we're going to incorporate Artsakh into Azerbaijan. And from the origin of these three republics, basically, unfortunately, clashes began because the Azeri side began attacking Armenians of Artsakh starting in May and June, July of 1918, when these three republics were proclaimed, in order to annex this territory and drive the local native Armenian population of Artsakh out of this territory.
Now, Gevork, sorry to intervene really quick, but there's with some of the research that we had both done, it was really interesting to me. How were the British involved in some sort of control of Baku in this time frame?
Right.
Maybe it has some sort of significance. I was still trying to wrap my mind around it. So this is a genuine question in terms of trying to fully understand for myself. How were they so involved in this area? How did that happen?
Right.
Post-World War One, of course.
Yeah. So as I said, Nuri Pasha was this Ottoman Turkish general who basically, you can say, is actually one of the key founding fathers of so-called Azerbaijan. He suggested the name of this pan-Turkish name, fake name, but the Turks were defeated in World War One. But unfortunately, prior to their defeat, they also did a very gruesome act when they actually invaded their army of Nuri Pasha in September of 1918, invaded Baku and slaughtered the Armenians of Baku. Some 30,000 Armenians of Baku in mid-September were slaughtered by this Nuri Pasha's army. Turco so-called Azeri army slaughtered 30,000 Armenians of Baku. But that was in September of 1918. By already October and late October, the Turkish side was losing on other fronts in World War One against the Allies. So once the Turks, by the end of October of 1918, were defeated by the Allies, and they signed the Armistice of Mudros against, they actually acknowledged their defeat in October 31st of 1918. After that, basically the British, as the victorious side, as being one of the sides of the Allies, they sent a small expeditionary force to Baku and actually occupied Baku in mid-November of 1918. So after that, the British were, as a victorious side, the Allied side had actually won against the Turks and other powers, their allies, including Azerbaijan. That's an important thing, because Azerbaijan, since they actually joined with the Turks in the so-called Islamic Army of Caucasus of Nuri Pasha, they were actually considered as the defeated side that actually fought against the allies. This is also an important point. While the Armenians were given a status of allied side, because Armenian Voluntary Detachment also served on different fronts fighting with the Allies. So Armenians were considered as the Allied side. The Azeris fought against the Allies. But the British were the victorious side, and they actually occupied Baku, and they had a provisional government installed in Baku, British provisional government ruled by General William Thompson, who was a British general and also like the High Commissioner and Military Governor of Azerbaijan. And this is right. So this is how the British actually got involved into all these, political nuances and played a role. And you can say sometimes the British would actually stick to decisions that were basically fair, but sometimes obviously under pressure, unfortunately, by the Azeris, they would suggest things that weren't as proper in terms of like recognizing the rights of the Armenian population of Artsakh. For example, General Thompson, he actually suggested, perhaps temporarily, quote unquote, Artsakh can be part of this Baku government, Azeri government, until the Paris Peace Conference would set things straight. And then you would have a decision in 1919. As you know, the Paris Peace Conference was set up by victorious allies to sort of, finalize all these border, disputes and things like that, But a very important point that General Thompson said is like the Paris Peace Conference would actually decide and bring about a final decision that will recognize Artsakh being part of, Republic of Armenia or perhaps Republic of Azerbaijan. But as we know, historically, that never happened. And allies and the peace conference actually decided opted for Artsakh being included in the territory of Republic of Armenia, because they made a simple point. They said, look, it's 95% historic Armenian populated region, which is historic Armenia. You should be followed by the principle of self-determination. So if the population of Artsakh, of Karabakh, which was one of the names, non-Armenian names that later on came up after the Middle Ages. if this territory decides to be part of Armenia, you should let it be part of Armenia. The people themselves have to decide. This is the principle of self-determination. So when you have a region with a 95% plus Armenian population, obviously these people are, in a referendum or a vote, they're going to vote to be included in a country that they want to be part of. It's only democratic and fair to do that. And this was the position taken by the Allies and even the British, Mike. And what is interesting, as you know, there was an organization known as the League of Nations, which the League of Nations was like the predecessor of the
UN.
Of the UN. Exactly. Yeah. It's a legal predecessor. And the League of Nations, it said we should follow on this principle. And in February 24, 1920, they actually, had this, decision by the League of Nations saying that, look, these people, through self-determination, they have to decide to be part of the country that they want to be. And so it's going to be Armenia. So the League of Nations in February 24, 1920 said, Artsakh and adjoining Armenian populated territories, according to the principle of self-determination, have to be part of the Republic of Armenia. These people are, those parts of so-called Azerbaijan that are Azeri populated, let them be part of Azerbaijan, but not these 95% plus of people. They're obviously not going to be happy under, foreign domination. They want to be with their own mother country, with their own people. That's only fair and very democratic thing to do.
Before we jump into, I think, Mike, you have a question, but I do want to mention we are live on Clubhouse. We are speaking with historian Gevork Nazaryan from Armenia live, and we're basically covering the ancient history of Artsakh to pretty much what's going on today. If you do have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring you up, and you can ask your question.
Yeah, so Gevork, I know you briefly mentioned some of the pogroms or massacres that occurred during this time after the Bolshevik Revolution, post-World War One. It's a dark topic, I do understand, but can you elaborate further on some of the events that occurred outside of the border shifting and the diplomatic or political talks that we've been kind of going over the last few minutes?
Absolutely, yes. Between the period of 1918 to 1920, there were a series of massacres of Armenians of Artsakh and adjoining areas, and I said all the way up to Baku. The Armenians were living there, and these, Turkish, Turko-Azeri armies, which is quite interesting, Mike. This sort of, when the Azeris attacked, the Turkish forces were active with them. It was like Turko-Azeri forces. And we saw the same thing like in the recent war. When they attacked, it was like a coalition of the Turks and Azeris fighting against Armenians, and many make the arguments that, Azeris wouldn't be able to have some of their so-called quote-unquote successful campaigns that they did without the Turkish support, with all the advanced, aircraft and the drones and what have you. And the same thing happened between 1918 in 1920. As I said, Nuri Pasha, this Turkish general, brother of this genocidal Enver Pasha, who suggested the name Azerbaijan, his armies massacred all the Armenians all the way until they marched all the way to Baku until September of 1918, when I said, tens of thousands of Armenians were massacred. And this continued onwards until as late as March of 1920, there was a huge massacre of Armenians in Shushi. When Azeri forces in March of 1920, they attacked the Armenian city of Shushi, which was an important cultural center, not only of Artsakh, but all of Armenia. They attacked and massacred 30,000 Armenians were put to the sword by these Azeri forces. And what is interesting, after this massacre, Shushi was leveled to the ground. All of the Armenian inhabitants were killed and driven away. And through this means, Azeris actually shifted the demographic of the city. And from 1920 onward, they brought in Azeris who actually settled in these homes of the Armenians. And Shushi in all of Artsakh was the only city after the massacre of 1920. We have to be very clear. After they killed off the Armenians of the city, it became a majority Azeri populated city after the massacre of the Armenians in 1920. And today Aliyev is, saying that, look, we had a majority in Shushi, Azeri majority, but he's not talking about how the Azeris actually established that majority, through massacre and the killing of the native Armenians of Shushi. This is how they established this so-called majority after 1920. So this policy of killing off and driving away the Armenian native population was clearly a policy of, ethnic genocide, ethnic cleansing, and I would say in a greater picture of things, it definitely also fits into the picture of the Armenian genocide, because like I said, continuation of the Armenian genocide, because like I said, Nuri Pasha is the brother of Enver Pasha, is, pursuing the same pan-Turkish policy. Armenia is sort of this, Armenia and Armenians are a wedge that are dividing the Turkic peoples, and this wedge has to be destroyed so these people can unite and create this vast Turkic, pan-Turkish empire known as so-called Turan.
Yeah. Now, I know you touched on this a little bit, but can you elaborate more as how were Armenia and Azerbaijan Sovietized, and what was the fate of Artsakh because of that?
Right. Basically, Bolsheviks, as I said, after 1917, they did come to power in late 1917, in November of 1917, but they weren't able to establish their rule throughout much of Russia or the Russian Empire. There was Russia itself was engulfed in a civil war. So it took them a couple of years before they actually, entrenched themselves into Russia proper. And after that, they expanded into the territories of former Russian Empire. And, this included South Caucasus as well, the republics that we mentioned that just briefly established or reestablished their independence, Georgia, Armenia, and just Azerbaijan, which in history was proclaimed for the first time in 1918. So basically, they expanded into this area of South Caucasus. And the Bolsheviks, actually, they established their rule first and foremost in Azerbaijan with the help of, believe it or not, Turks. So Mustafa Kemal, who was so-called Turkish nationalist leader, he actually collaborated with the Bolsheviks, collaborated with the Lenin government to actually Sovietize Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan became Soviet in late April of 1920. But Armenia still had remained independent. So Republic of Armenia still retained its own government, while Azerbaijan was already by late April of 1920 was Sovietized. So what happened is after this, the Soviets basically started the Bolshevik government favoring more the Azeri side because it was Sovietized. And unfortunately, these two entities collaborated against the Republic of Armenia, against independent Armenia. And they actually invaded, these already Soviet and Azeri armies invaded Artsakh, invaded territories of parts of eastern Armenia. And they annexed these territories. But again, the Armenian population never recognized this. This sort of like turmoil lasted until late 1920, when Soviet forces marched into Republic of Armenia, and in collaboration, this is very important, with the Turks, Mustafa Kemal's forces. So basically, Armenia in this pincer movement was invaded and partitioned between Kemalists on one side. So parts of Republic of Armenia were occupied by the Kemalists to the west, and parts of in the east of the Republic of Armenia were occupied by the Soviets. After that, in November of 1920, Armenia became a very small portion of the Republic of Armenia, proclaimed itself as a Soviet Armenia, which only formed a fraction of the Republic of Armenia, Republic of Armenia was about at least 70,000 square kilometers, but actually with the Wilsonian Arbitrary Award made by American President Woodrow Wilson, it was actually more than 160,000 square kilometers, which included 4 provinces of Western Armenia in its territory. But because of this illegal invasion and occupation of Armenia by these Kemalist and Bolshevik forces, Armenia was illegally occupied by the Bolsheviks and the Kemalists. And after that, which is quite interesting, the local Armenians in places like Artakh, Syunik, they obviously resisted this invasion. And what is interesting, the Azeri Soviet government by Narimanov said, you know what, in order to quell this Armenian resistance, we recognize, after Sovietization of Armenia itself, we recognize that Artsakh, Syunik, which they call Zangezur, and Nakhichevan, believe it or not, which is another Armenian territory today, annexed by Azerbaijan, Artsakh or Karabakh, Zangezur, and Nakhichevan are integral parts of Soviet Armenia. This was made by Soviet Azeri leader, stated in December 1st, 1920, Narimanov, who made this declaration. So can you imagine, we actually have a declaration by the Azeris themselves stating that, Artsakh and even Nakhichevan are integral parts of Armenia. But what happened is in June and July of 1921, once again, Soviet leaders brought this question on the agenda. And, on July 4th, 1921, it was decided that, Artsakh would remain part of Armenia, Soviet Armenia, already Sovietized. But what happened is on the other day, on July 5th, Joseph Stalin, who was already a key Soviet leader, he actually interfered and said, no, you know what? Artsakh would stay, or Karabakh, as they called it, Karabakh would stay or actually be placed within Azerbaijan, Soviet Azerbaijan, which was never part of an independent Azerbaijan, would be placed in Soviet Azerbaijan. However, we would grant the Armenians local autonomy, so they would have Armenian autonomy, but within like Soviet Azeri rule. This happened as a direct result of interference, which was actually illegal because he himself, he was not, part of Armenia's government or Azeri government. And so he interfered from Moscow and actually forced this decision, which placed Karabakh, Artsakh, within Soviet Azerbaijan with local Armenian autonomy. But, we saw that local autonomy was just on paper.
Yeah, he didn't waste any time.
Yeah.
Literally,
what was his reason?
The next day, can you imagine?
One day later.
Right. And guys, this is a different topic, but I think this was related with the broader picture that because Soviets were trying to appease the Turks and Mustafa Kemal government on their side, because even at this time, the Turks were interfering and basically presenting themselves as sort of this arbitrary side to the Azeris. They would actually defend the interest of the Azeri side in the Soviet government. So the Soviets at this time wanted the Turks on their side. They were hoping that Mustafa Kemal eventually would join their side, and a Bolshevik government would even be established in Turkey. So as you can see, this was part of a greater scheme of things, unfortunately, which the Armenian side, Armenian, reality and Armenian people were subjugated to because of these greater schemes and political machinations by these, powers.
To keep that rapid expansion of communism going in the area and a firmer grip, no?
Exactly. So this is an important, thing that we have to point out, that, at the greater scheme of things was always this Turkey, which acted as a sponsor. the Kemalists acted as sponsors of Azerbaijan. Remember, and what is interesting is they were the ones who actually basically, you could say, even betrayed Azerbaijan, because they negotiated and bargained away Azeri independence for their own ends with the Soviets. I mean, Azerbaijan was independent until late April of 1920, but Kemalists actually played a role in Sovietization of Azerbaijan, which lost its independence.
Doesn't
can
seem
you
too
imagine?
surprising.
Yeah, and the Azeris today, they still praise the Turks as their, big brothers. I don't know, whatever, but it's quite interesting. The Turks actually, they for their own ends, they actually were willing to, basically strike a deal with the Lenin government during this time. So, this is, but and in 1923, the so-called status of mountainous autonomous region of Karabakh was finalized. This so-called, Nagorno-Karabakh Oblast, as you know, that status was finalized. So it would become an Armenian autonomy within Soviet Azerbaijan. But again, an important point, within a supra-state of the USSR. Artsakh was never part of independent Azerbaijan. It was part of Soviet Union as a state, because Soviet Azerbaijan in itself was an administrative division of the USSR. It wasn't an independent country that Karabakh was part of. Karabakh was within the USSR as a country. It wasn't part of independent Azerbaijan. It was part of Soviet Azerbaijan, which was just an administrative division of the Soviet Union.
Now, segueing into the next topic, which would probably jump a few decades, right? We're talking about post-World War One, pre-World War II, moving forward, upon many failed attempts, is what we understand in written doctrine, that, Armenia tried to regain control of Artsakh and whatnot, or maybe they should try to be independent. Something interesting happened sometime during the 80s with Gorbachev's perestroika and glasnost, which kind of brought in a reformation of communism, if you will, during this time, and kind of allowed some of these republics to perhaps have a little bit more of a voice, right? And this is kind of what was a catalyst that led into what happened post-Soviet collapse. You want to maybe talk about that a little bit, and what happened that basically eventually led to the first Karabakh War?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. These policies by the late Soviet period by Premier Mikhail Gorbachev, who said that, we can actually talk about some of the thorny issues that our country faced. We can actually have more sort of like a freedom of speech kind of environment, and people can actually voice their grievances. So this led to the belief by the Armenian side that, we have all these issues. Armenians constituted more than 95% of Artsakh, but during the Soviet time, that number dropped to some 75% of Karabakh's or Artsakh's, population. Obviously, this was a slow drive of driving away the Armenian population, and artificially increasing the Azeri population by the Soviet Azeri authorities. Meanwhile, another important, as I talked about, Armenian territory of Nakhichevan, which still had significant Armenian presence in 1920, when it was Sovietized. By late 1980s, that number dwindled to few percent. Can you imagine? I mean, these policies were so successful, these Azerification policies by the Soviet Azeri government were so successful that in Nakhichevan, Armenians virtually disappeared, and our last remaining monuments there were simply wiped out in front of our eyes. You guys might have seen those video of Armenian Juga Khachkar Cemetery. Crossstones are medieval Armenian monuments are being bulldozed and destroyed by the Azeri army. It was actually videoed from the Iranian side of the border anyway. But so the Armenian side basically hoped that Gorbachev was actually sincere, and they can actually say that the Armenians of Artsakh, the native Armenian population, is being discriminated by this Soviet Azeri government, and obviously them being Armenian, they would actually feel more comfortable with even Soviet Armenia, because at that time in 87, 88, it was still Soviet Armenia. So this movement, this democratic movement of Armenian rights, of defending the rights of the people of Artsakh, the Armenians of Artsakh, of Karabakh, and were basically just protest, people protesting and saying, what, we're being discriminated against. Soviet Azerbaijan is not investing into these so-called autonomous Armenian region. It's driving people away. It's investing money in Baku and saying, what, Armenians of Artsakh, you come over to Baku, you live here, you don't have to live in Stepanakert. You don't have to live, they're not opening factories, they're not opening businesses. So that way the Armenians are artificially basically go to Armenia, go to Russia, go to, Baku even, So Armenia said, we realize that this anti-Armenian policy would only end if this autonomous region returns to the fold of its, mother country, which is Armenia. So in late 1987, actually, and more like in early 1988, it really took off, in like February of 1988, you had these huge protests of Stepanakert, which is the capital of Artsakh, and quickly in Yerevan and other parts of Armenia as well, of hundreds of thousands of Armenians showing their solidarity with the Armenians of Artsakh, of saying, yes, Artsakh as an Armenian region has to reunite with Soviet Armenia. But what happened is, like, Armenians were totally taken off guard and were never ready for this, Mike, when basically the Azeri side answered in a fashion that was reminiscent of earlier times. They just attacked Armenians in cold blood and slaughtered Armenians throughout Azerbaijan, in cities like Sumgait, in Ganzak, or at that time known as Kirovabad, in Baku.
Which was going to lead me to my next follow-up questions, was about the pogroms, the pogroms that followed during this time between, what was it, 88 to about 91, before the war started, correct? Correct. Absolutely, yeah. So basically, the Azeris resorted to this violence and basically massacres. And Armenian side was totally caught off guard, because we basically raised the question in a democratic way. People protested, people signed petitions to the Gorbachev government, to the Azeri government, and they did all of this according to the law, according to the constitution of the USSR. This is an interesting thing. Like, the local Soviet or the Council of Karabakh or Artsakh, they actually proclaimed, and they had like a legal vote, that they are reunited with Soviet Armenia. And the Soviet Armenian Council, the parliament, did the same thing. They said, yes, we accept the decision of the people, the majority of Karabakh, to be reunified. I mean, it was like a democratic vote. And according to the Soviet constitution, it was allowed, even an autonomous region was allowed to secede from a constituent Soviet republic, from one constituent Soviet republic, and join another Soviet republic. So all of this was done according to law, according to the constitution of the Soviet Union. But like you said, the Azeri side completely disregarded, and they resorted to these massacres and to violence, killing tens and hundreds of Armenians throughout Azerbaijan. And this, unfortunately, led to the events that we know so well. In late 1991, already the Soviet Union collapsed, and the Azeri side not only resorted to massacres, but their armed formations
and their army basically started to attack Armenian settlements of Artsakh, and this is how it began. First, with the massacre of the civilian population of Azerbaijan and parts of Artsakh, and then basically an outright attacks of their military units on the Armenian settlements of Artsakh. And from 1991, we basically were engaged in this brutal and bloody war until 1994 against the Azeri side.
Wow, it's unbelievable. They, it's like they always have that disregard to law, but just in general.
Well, I mean, imagine at that point, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was no, I guess, call it big brother or big sister, kind of looking over and kind of regulating things, right?
Yeah.
Azerbaijan was just like a loose cannon at this point.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the developments after the 94 ceasefire that ended the fighting, and basically just in general around Artsakh. What type of developments took place?
Right. So, between 1991 and 1994, the Armenian side basically, was able to actually not only defend itself, but actually, when these attacks continued on, was able to actually secure adjoining areas, which served as these attack bases for the Azeri army. So when the ceasefire took place in May of 1994, obviously the Armenian side was the winning side, and the Armenians had pointed out that as a winning side, basically we still want peace with the Azeris as long as the Azeri side recognizes the legal, lawful right of the Armenians of Artsakh to self-determination. I mean, that's encoded in international law, the right to self-determination. And henceforth, the Minsk group, which is like a OSCE Minsk group, OSCE is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's an important European Union entity, which actually basically, not only monitors, but actually regulates these conflicts in and around Europe. The OSCE group, so the EU set up this OSCE Minsk group in 1992, which actually was tasked with, regulating the conflict and putting an end to it by reaching a sustainable and just solution, for all the parties involved. And obviously the principle of self-determination was enshrined in the documents that were put forth by the Minsk OSCE group. And the co-chairs of the Minsk OSCE group were Russia, France, and the United States. And they remain so until the very day, until now. And what is interesting, by that, Azerbaijan actually agreed that, they would actually have a negotiated and peaceful settlement with the Armenian side. So when they signed the ceasefire of 1994, which was brokered by Russia, and when they signed a number of documents with the OSCE Minsk group, they actually, in these documents, they stated, Aliyev stated that
Haidar.
Haidar, and then the son, the father, and then the son, both actually did, that they would actually seek a peaceful solution to the conflict, and that military solution is never an option. And there you go. Even before that, obviously, we know, like, they violated that in 2016, as you know. Basically in 2016, that was like a mini test drive of the war that happened in September of 2020. They attacked Artsakh. They invaded Artsakh in April of 2016. But they stopped, and obviously they waited for a more proper time, which for them was September of 2020, Mike. And that's when so-called, Second Artsakh War, that's sometimes what it's referred to, or the 2020 war once again broke out with the results that, I think all of us are familiar with. But, I think we may have to make this important point that they violated the Minsk OSCE group's principle that they would not resort to a military solution to this conflict, and they will stick to the negotiated settlement and to the negotiations that were ongoing since 1992, even not even 1994.
Which is basically where we were headed next. Is where and how or why did they do what they did to cause a second Nagorno-Karabakh war? Which, I mean, we've seen through history thus far. They are aggressors. They don't want to follow any guidelines that they themselves have agreed upon, and it's kind of part of the reason throughout the last, 20, 25 years, even prior to the second war, we all saw there was little skirmishes and flare-ups along some of the eastern borders. And they more or less violated a lot of these treaties. And eventually they decided, we're going to take matters into our own hands. And it's this, again, if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more onto, I guess, micro information as to what led to what happened, last year.
Yes. Yeah. That's a very good question. I mean, I think, first of all, an important thing that the Armenian side was actually pointing out that, throughout these years, Aliyev government, Ilham Aliyev was, using the oil revenue money that he's getting from his, wells in Baku to buy these huge, supplies of arms. So he spent in the last 15 years or so around $35 billion just on arms,
Wow.
Just arming. Can you imagine? Yeah, just basically, so when he was arming to that extent, a lot of, analysts and, political analysts, they were saying, like, obviously Azerbaijan is heading for a war. And obviously the Armenian side was also preparing for that. But this is an important thing, that there was this balance because he invested so much of this, oil money into the arms. This in itself created a disbalance. But he also considered the geopolitical realities. Turkey under Erdogan started to pursue more aggressive policies, which are sometimes referred to as neo-Ottoman policies. So this dictator of Turkey, who considers himself as, I don't know, elder brother or what have you of Ilham Aliyev, he basically starting around 2015, 2016, and especially in more recent years, he vouched and basically vouched to the Azeri side that, in the next war, you're going to have our support. You're going to have our support militarily, politically, diplomatically. And this is exactly what he did, Mike. He just basically, a key example of this would be like Turkish military F-16s were actually guiding and coordinating the Turkish drones, Bayraktar drones that were attacking our positions. Can you imagine? I mean, Turkey, a NATO country, was an active participant of this war. Without this participation, let me tell you, I mean, definitely the results of this war would be totally different.
Yeah,
so what had changed is actually Turkey coming much strongly on the side of the Azeri side. And another important player, you would say, Russia, again, unfortunately, during the first war, it made it very clear that Turkey cannot interfere in Artsakh war. And a number of key high-ranking Russian officials made that clear. If you interfere, it's going to be like a third world war. But this time around, Mike, at best, it had like a neutral position, so to speak. I mean, it made it known to the Turkish and Azeri side that, well, it's a conflict, but, that's a conflict that, it's not taking place in Armenia. It's taking place in this vague territory. It's not, it's not part of our responsibilities. We don't have armed forces there. We don't have an alliance there. So basically they use this as sort of like a pretext, which send a very bad, in my opinion, message to the Turks and the Azeris that, at least we're going to be neutral. But I would say not even neutral, unfortunately, because remember we talked about a lot of those arms being bought by the Azeri side. Well, guess what? A huge share of that was actually Russian-produced weaponry that was sold to the Azeris.
Well, Russia's always sold both sides, so...
Exactly.
Them, yeah.
So what Armenians were saying, like, if you're an ally and, we have these alliances, I mean, we can take other examples of countries being allies. They don't sell weapons to the enemy side, which is not technically in an alliance with another side, I mean, United States would never sell weaponry to its ally country. To the enemy of its ally country that would be used against its own ally.
Well, actually, the United States has sold weapons to who was their allies at the time, and in some way somehow turned into their enemy or whatnot over time. But it's a common practice with a lot of these major superpowers. If they're try to make money, it's not making money on one side, you're making money on all sides.
Now my question to you, Gevork, is as far as Turkey being a NATO member, I mean, obviously there's laws that, like you said, they weren't allowed as a NATO member to get involved. What happened? How did they get away with this?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Why they would basically, what they did is they would never formally part of the conflict. This is the thing. This is how they actually, But obviously, we know that, for example, to be a drone operator, this strike drone, these Bayraktars, which are their it's basically, again, American technology, just basically modified.
Yeah.
They present it as Turkish, but the core of it is American. Even the producer, this Seljuk Bayraktar, who is incidentally son-in-law of Erdogan.
Yeah.
Seljuk Bayraktar, who is the supposedly invented this. Yeah, he actually studied at MIT in the United States. This is where he actually picked up the technology. Anyway, in early 2000s. So basically, these drones, you need, for the operator to actually operate them, you need like at least a year or a couple of years to operate them. These drones basically came to Azerbaijan in mid 2020, in summer of 2020, and they were already used in September of 2020. Obviously, the operators weren't Azeris, okay?
Yeah.
They were Turks. They were Turks, so that but obviously it's like this, like you say, they were never formal part of this conflict. It was but they're assisting, or they would say like, oh, you know what? Yeah, we have our F-16s in Azerbaijan. You even have these shots of these F-16s, but they were just there for training, and they remained there after military drills that we had with Azeris, but obviously...
Yeah, there was also proof of radar showing like the Turkish, military planes in the air for like 16 hours, something, doing just a loop, which is, that's a clear sign that they're controlling their drones. They're controlling,
their drones through these F-16s, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, even a lot of people point out that, this was documented, by the United States and many even governments. They pointed this out. They actually imported these jihadi fighters from like Syria, Libya, thousands of them. They paid them as mercenaries to actually, and to serve as cannon fodder. So these jihadis would be a first line that would attack Armenian positions, and we even have videos of these jihadi fighters fighting, killed. Armenian side actually arrested a few of them. A couple of them were basically arrested by the Armenian side. Yeah. They're still in Armenian custody of these jihadi fighters. This is again violation of international law. Turkey should be held accountable for doing such things, for like bringing these terrorists, they're Al-Qaeda affiliated fighters, jihadi fighters, Al-Qaeda fighting against the Armenian side. Can you imagine?
And they openly admitted after getting caught that they were paid a certain sum.
Yes. No? Yeah. Yes. I mean, we have all the evidence. This and I'm sure this will all go to to the International Court of Justice, to other UN bodies. This is, Armenian side just recently, actually, and there's a lot of evidence that these fighters are still in these territories, occupied Artsakh territories. These jihadi fighters, there were even skirmishes with Iranian side. Can you imagine? So these jihadis, they would even attack the Iranian border guards and have shootouts and skirmishes with the Iranian side. And they published these photos of these jihadi fighters.
Yeah, it's very frustrating when you think about this stuff. Before we have one more last question for you, and then I do want to remind everyone on Clubhouse that's listening. We are speaking with historian Gevork Nazaryan. If you missed the beginning, we will have this up on all the podcast platforms tomorrow. We began with the early beginning of history of Artsakh, and now we're kind of talking about the recent war. And after this question, if you have any questions, please raise your hand in Clubhouse, and you can ask any question regarding this topic to Gevork directly. My final question to you is, how and why do Azeris and Turks falsify the history, and also what can we do to fight against this?
Right. So, yeah, unfortunately, like I said, Aliyev is, using the power of the purse, is billions of dollars, oil money, to try to, influence, especially academia, political circles, and what have you. And he puts out, like, his side puts out this false narratives, basically falsification, complete falsification of history. They would try to erase the facts, like negate the reality of Armenian presence, which, as I said, all the evidence shows, and we have all the most ancient sources clearly stating that. So basically, he's utilizing that. But I think in the beginning of show, you made a very good point that, Armenians themselves, first and foremost, have to educate themselves and become these beacons of truth. If we ourselves, we don't know our own history that we just talked about in this last hour, about Artsakh, about, how the names comes from, about the Armenian population in Artsakh. If we ourselves don't know these historic facts, we can't actually combat against these, falsifiers that are paid, by the Aliyev, government to falsify history. So I think first and foremost, we have to educate ourselves. Then we have to take a more active role in actually, having, academic conferences, round tables and what have you, that we actually discuss these important and pertinent topics. And we have academics with integrity who actually, just state history as it is. Because like I said, history is on our side. Truth is on our side.
Well, the biggest problem when you say history is on our side, but a lot of people don't understand that the way their agenda works is if you take, if you have native people that have been there for thousands of years, how do you eliminate them? By making the rest of the world believe that they're not native. They're just let's say a tribe of people that somehow moved in, and we gave them we said, okay, you can stay here for now. And now they're making trouble. They're not behaving, and we need to get rid of them. And that's why, you're talking about destruction of the khachkars, the churches, even the engravings, and this bogus Caucasian Albanian history, which is, complete BS. And this is what we need to fight against. And I've said it from the first episode to the second one to this one, and I will continue to say it. The reason we do this, why we have this podcast and these amazing historians on, is because we want to educate ourselves, our audience, our next generation, the youth, even the elderly who don't know about this stuff. We need to know so we can be armed and ready when they come at us with, their churches and this and that.
Exactly. Why I completely agree. I mean, if we're educated, I think enough of us are educated, and in turn become, activists of truth, you can say, of history. We can actually confront all these lies. But if we're ignorant of these realities, if we're ignorant of our own history and history in general, we can't confront them. I mean, they have like conferences, especially in the universities, when we have a lot of Armenian students, and we have to be, vocal. We have to, actually confront these attempts by Aliyev, by the Turks, to pay off these so-called quote unquote scholars. I mean, Turks, as you know, until recently, for the last decades, they focused a lot on falsifying history with regards to the Armenian genocide.
Yeah.
But now it's obviously harder for them when, it has been acknowledged by all the branches of the U.S. government, by the president, by the Congress, by the Senate.
Yeah.
So it's harder for them to have these fake scholars pay by the Ankara, by Erdogan, to basically falsify history. For Aliyev, it's a little bit easier. Why? Because like a lot of people, unfortunately, like non-Armenian people, they simply don't know. They're ignorant of historic facts. So he just presents, he wraps this falsity, these falsifications in such a way that a lot of the time it's hard for like someone who's not very well versed or completely ignorant of our region, our history, to understand that basically this is not corresponding to historic facts. And this is where the Armenian people have to come into the play, because we have to play a more active role in saying, this is the reality, this is how things are. So basically they put out a lot of these, books, a lot of videos, a lot of, they organize these conferences, events, colloquia, and things like that. If we're not confronting that, we don't have enough people who know the truth, who actually, actually speak out in a right way, in a proper way. You have to, first of all, be armed with knowledge. You have to know these academic and historic facts to actually, confront these falsifications. And I would argue, via like a lot of our own people, they mean well, but they, first of all, they have to learn of these facts. I mean, how many people that we just talked about this history are very well versed in these facts? They know some things, maybe they know some things like bits and pieces from here and there, but they need to have a complete picture. See, like we try to trace, 3,000-4,000 years of history of Artsakh in one show. They have to know this, they have to know from the origins to our present. They have to know all these facts and how things develop, so they can actually confront these falsifiers.
Yeah, we need to start doing these seminars, and I think also one of the problems is Armenia, or even here, Armenian schools, they don't teach this stuff, and it needs to be taught from the first grade. I think they should start. So you have 18,000 years to cover, so it needs to be imprinted in our next generation, so they know. And I think just knowing, that self, the rejuvenation of knowing who you are, where you came from, your ancestors. And now, next, if you have anything to add to that, I was going to go to Clubhouse.
Oh no, I completely agree, and like I said, that's why I think what you guys are doing is so important, and I hope more Armenians worldwide understand the importance, because like our identity, without our own knowledge of ourselves, we can't speak of an Armenian identity if you don't know your own history and culture. So you have to, first of all, learn of your own roots. You have to know your history, your culture, in order to speak of you, being proud of your identity, defending your identity. And then unfortunately, or I don't know, maybe fortunately for Armenians, it's much harder, because we have these aggressive foes who basically try to, in many ways, not only sort of like falsify that identity, but also maybe even erase it. But you have to stand strong. When you can stand strong and be proud of yourself, and in many ways be a productive member of society, of your own people, when you actually know your roots, know your history, know your culture. So, be it history of Artsakh, that it's actually part and parcel, inseparable part and parcel of Armenian history. You don't have any ifs, doubts, I don't know what have you, because even Armenians are bombarded with this, Aliyev propaganda is bombarded.
It's exhausting.
They just, he basically, from his budget, he spends annually, I don't know, like this X amount of hundreds of millions of dollars just to falsify history, and that's okay for him. He set up a special fund to do just that. We have to realize that this is how they're working in terms of this very strong propaganda. You guys probably even saw it during the war. I mean, they were attacking us on all fronts.
Complete information warfare.
Information warfare, exactly. Yep. And falsification is Armenian history is part of that, because even the there are United Nation charters that, indigenous people have rights. Armenian people as an indigenous people to their native land being invaded, colonized, subjugated, and wiped out. They have rights that, we have to uphold. You can't put the invader and the attacker, the aggressor, on the same scale as someone who has been living there for 3,000 years.
Yeah. And that's why we need to get, besides us learning, the end result of this is by educating ourselves, is bringing the international community to get involved in, learning about our history by doing seminars, like you said. Just books need to be translated. There's amazing books out there, and I keep saying this, Armenian books about Armenian history that needs to be translated into English. It's very important. I know myself, since me and Mike started this Herosner project, and everything we've learned together about our history. We all knew these small, snippets of things that have happened, and you make yourself feel proud. Level. Yeah, but just doing the research and diving deep into these topics, and we're going to continue to. Honestly, I feel stronger for some reason. And like, the word rejuvenation is so important. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I took a breath of fresh air by learning so much. We do have a question from Ludmila on Clubhouse. Ludmila, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for this talk. We're very educated. Gevork, you spoke about how we can...
Mm-hmm. Yes?
Ludmila?
Hello?
I think she...
Yeah, sorry. You spoke about how we can fight against հայրենախոսական գեղտարարության դեմ պայքարը առաջինը մենք պետք է կրթվենք, մենք պետք է իմանանք մեր պատմությունը։ Հիմա այս նոր ծերունները, որ գալիս են թե Հայաստանում, թե Թուրքում, ինչպես կկապվեք դա հիմա Հայաստանում ինչ որ տեղի ունենում պատմաբանական, պատմագիտական ֆակուլտետներում, այն ինչ որ մենք լսում ենք Թուրքից, լավ բան չենք լսում, որ հակազգային գաղափարներ պատմության հետ կապված կրթության նախարարությունից, որ ճնշվում են պատմաբանական ֆակուլտետները, որ ճնշվում են պատմաբանները, որ այդքան ազգային դուրս հանեն, ազգային դուրս հանելու համար նախ պետք է հանեն պատմությունը, նախ պետք է դիմեն դարձից պատմությունը։ Դա ոնց եք տեսնում եւ իսկապես այդպես է, այդքան վատ է, թե ուղղակի ավելի մեծացնում է, ուժացնում է։ Այդ մեկ հարց է, երկրորդն էլ պատմության տեսակետից քաղաքականություն չեմ ուզում որպես քաղաքական հարց, ավելի պատմական հարց է։ Ռուսաստանը Հայաստանի համար թշնամի է, թե բարեկամ։
Thank you, Ludmila.
Thank you.
We'll translate it later, but if you can.
Okay, well, should I can answer in English or
yeah, we
whatever.
prefer because we want this.
Audience
it's heard
is mostly English.
Audience is mostly English.
Right, sure. Okay, thank you for these two questions, Ludmila. So basically, the first question was how Armenian academia in Armenia is, how much of it is pretty much in line of pointing all these truths out, and some of these falsifications, perhaps they also gradually crept by the Turks and the Azeris. They gradually have crept into Armenian academia of Armenia, or have they? That was what Ludmila was wondering in the first question, and I answered the second one as well. So in my opinion, honestly, in Armenia, there were some attempts of the sort of like exerting this soft power, because in Armenia now we can actually refer to this Turkish and Azeri attempts as soft power. You probably guys know what soft power is, like basically influencing a nation through these different information war and basically like perks and things like that, basically influencing the way that you want through economy or what have you. But in my opinion, no. I mean, academia in Armenia, we have very credible, very good scholars here in like that, have been doing amazing work with regards to Armenian history. So this is my opinion, that these attempts were and will be made, but luckily, for most part, Ludmila, overwhelmingly, Armenian academia and the academicians, historians, professors, what have you, are very upstanding. And, in my opinion, it would never have a major foothold, these attempts. So in my humble opinion, be at rest. I know many of these professors, I know these, deans and what have you, and they're extraordinary people, very, they have that integrity. So no, I don't think these attempts would go far, by the Turks and the Azeris. Referring to your second question, and that was also interesting question that we briefly touched up. I know maybe it might be touchy for some people. She actually pointed out that what role Russia played and plays with regards of, acting as the ally, because like we have treaties with Russia that it's an ally of Armenia. Armenia is part of this joint collective security treaty organization, which is a military organization, CSTO. And like a lot of Armenians have been pointing out that Russia should play a more active role in putting a check to these Azeri and Turkish sort of like aggression and provocations. This is my opinion. I know you guys can disagree, but I think Ludmila is making a good point. I mean, unfortunately, Russia is sort of not obviously, out of its own interests or what they consider their own interests, or the leadership of Russia, which I could maybe make the argument that it's not like you can argue that it's actually not even to their own interests. I wouldn't be the guy that are actually telling them what their interest is, but long-term interest of Russia, in my opinion, this is my opinion, like it would be putting a check to these Turkification of stronger Turkish influence in South Caucasus. But what we have seen is the opposite. Turkey has been actually, Russia has been actually collaborating and cooperating with Turkey and Azerbaijan. So, there are a lot of issues and concerns with regards to Russian cooperation with Turkey and Azerbaijan. I mean, you guys probably know they established in Aghdam region, they established a monitoring center is like half Russian, half Turkish. So they established this co-joint monitoring center for enforcing the peace in Karabakh, which is basic collaborative joint Turkish. Well, Turkey is pretty clear. It wants to extend its influence, and it has this neo-Ottoman policy of extending its influence into territories formerly under the influence of Russia. So as these two powers, Turkey and Russia, they can't share same geostrategic goals and interests. Actually, their geostrategic interests and goals clash, because both want to extend their influence on the same region, You can't have like cooperation, long-term cooperation, if you claim same territory as, being under your own influence. It obviously, there has to be a more dominant power, strong power that actually extends that influence. And this is more of a political thing, but I think Armenia has to also balance, just as Russia, for example, when Armenians unfortunately are saying these concerns to the Russian side, they're saying, we have this multi-vector policy, you shouldn't be concerned. Well, in that case, the Armenian side has to say, then the Armenian side also has to pursue a multi-vector balancing policy, which includes countries like France and United States, which time and again have clearly shown that, they're not indifferent to the plight of the Armenian people. For example, the Lynn Tracy, the ambassador of U.S. in Armenia, has visited parts of Armenia that have been under this Azeri aggression in Gevork province, Sunik province. That showed, her solidarity and concern. So, obviously, we have a lot of room to collaborate on that front as well. Like I said, if multi-vector policy is pursued by one country that says, it's an ally, then absolutely Armenia has the same right, and even more so, to do the same with countries such as France and United States, which also happen to be, as I remember, guys, I said, these two countries are the co-chairs of the Minsk OSCE group. So they're very important countries. These are the countries that today are saying that the Artsakh conflict will never be settled until the status of Artsakh and the right for the self-determination of the people of Artsakh is respected. And Russia has never made such a statement after the war. Only France and United States made these statements. These are very important. So, this is my kind of expanded answer to what Ludmila pointed out in terms of our alliance.
Thank you for the question, Ludmila. We have Ego, who has a question, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello, Gevork. Aram here from People of Art. We know each other.
Oh, hi, Aram. Yes. Glad to hear you.
Yeah.
What a great...
Yeah. So I have a question. Does the coming of Pashinyan have any influence on the loss of Artsakh in the current situation? In your opinion?
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you, Aram. Thank you. Nice to hear you, good friend. Thank you for the question. Well, I have to respectfully say, for most part, no, Aram. Again, and let me say why. Look, we know what happened, the stationing of Russian, they call them peacekeepers, troops, and this plan was outlined during, around 10 years ago, give or take, okay? So what happened as a result of this war was the so-called Lavrov plan. Lavrov is the foreign secretary of Russia, as you guys know, Sergei Lavrov. And, there was this informal plan known as the Sergei Lavrov plan, which would say, Armenians return the so-called occupied 7 regions around the former autonomous region of Karabakh, and Russian peacekeeping troops would be stationed in these areas. This plan was put together 10 years ago, and the Russian side was very active in pushing this. Okay, even before, they exerted very strong pressure on former Ser Sarkisyan government, who was in power before Pashinyan. So this plan comes about. Ser Sarkisyan at that time resisted, because obviously Armenian side was not prepared to simply hand over these territories for, Aliyev's promise or what have you, which obviously doesn't even worth the paper that he would, sign. So I would bring this as an evidence. If such plan never existed, if Russia would never pressure Armenia even before Pashinyan coming to power, I would say, yeah, maybe you have a point. But what we saw in a very worse scenario, implementation of the Lavrov plan that happened as a result of this war. Russian troops were stationed. Armenian side was forced to hand over those regions. And let me make that point clear. We actually handed back more territory as a result of the November 9, 2020 agreement than was lost during fighting, during the conflict. Can you imagine we handed over without fight Karvajar, much of Kashata, much of Kosakan.
And Pashinyan is not at fault, Gevork, and Pashinyan has nothing to do with this handing over more territories than even the Lavrov plan.
I'm not, obviously I'm not here to justify or defend Pashinyan. I mean, our loss speaks for itself, but I just hope you can put it into its context. Pashinyan is at fault, just as previous governments are also at fault for not doing more to strengthen a lot of our positions on the diplomatic, on the military, and other fronts. But obviously, at the end of the day, this scenario is and the roots of this, unfortunately, are much deeper than the Pashinyan is also very much at fault for signing the November 9 agreement. Absolutely. Something that never before, for handing off those territories, there were people that were saying...
On the flag day of Azerbaijan, right?
On the flag day of Azerbaijan. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
Thank you for the question, Ego, or Autumn, I should say. I think we have
many names.
The next question is from Christine. Christine, if you want to unmute yourself.
I don't have question right now, but I will keep going because I entered in the middle of the discussion. So I will keep going. And if I have a question, I will discuss. I will ask it.
Okay.
And we can discuss.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else have any questions to Gevork?
I have one. So it's not a question, but Gevork, I found out that in ancient Urartian, the word sushi means temple. Very interesting.
Wow.
So maybe that's why Master of Mashtos went there.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And the sushi is very shoshabert. It's very archaic, ancient, and again, like Azeris falsify and claim, it's Azeri, but obviously, as I said, the first time that one of their rulers, Pana Khan, entered this area, basically bribed himself into this area, was in mid-18th century. And all the ancient Armenian monuments and inscriptions you have with Armenian inscriptions are, from historic times. And, and that's why, incidentally, that's another thing. That's why they're destroying Armenian monuments, because that's the evidence, with the Armenian letters. That's why they destroyed the old Juga Khachkars with all the Armenian carvings, because it's clearly, showing that this area belonged to people, to the Armenian people. They have cemeteries, their ancestors are buried here, it's like, so that's why they're destroying it. But, obviously they were so stupid. They didn't think that, it was documented in secret from the Iranian side. And you can actually search on YouTube, destruction of Armenian cemetery of Juga or Julfa on YouTube. And, they're doing the same now in the occupied territories of Hadrut and Shushi. You saw that, the Ghazan Chesos Cathedral, they're actually completely even rechanging the shape. It looks now more like a mosque.
So sad.
Can you imagine? They destroyed the dome. If you look at it, now it has like a round mosque. So when you look at the city, it doesn't have this typical conic Armenian dome that would actually be what was the signature of the Armenian signature of the town. So by destroying it and having this sort of like the conic dome, having this round dome, it looks like a mosque when you look at it from afar. I mean, this is how far, and agencies like UNESCO and things like that, they have to speak out. I mean, this is unacceptable.
Yeah. And that's a really good point that you just brought up, is someone like an organization such as UNESCO, world known, world renowned. Why haven't they been more active in stepping in and protecting some of these sites?
Well, you're
regardless
right.
of
I mean,
treaty or regardless of armistice, whatever the case is.
yeah. Well, I'm sure that's why I said like that. What Azeris fear is the restarting of the negotiation process, which is something that the Armenian side will never give up to. Like when we begin these once again negotiations with the Minsk OSCE group, which France and the United States have pointed out that have to restart, all of this you can bet, Mike, it's going to be put on the table. So Aliyev made the statement that the conflict is over. We won. There's no more Karabakh. There's no more question of Karabakh. That's it. The conflict is over. But the Minsk OSCE group told him, no, the conflict is not over, and it will never be over until the rights of self-determination of the native population of Artsakh are fully met, and the final status of Karabakh or Artsakh is finalized. Yeah. That was like a slap in his face. He was just shocked. Yeah. That's why we have to very closely make sure and work with, especially, unfortunately, I mean, especially with the France and United States, which are the co-chair countries of the OSCE group, and have made these important official statements with regards to finalization of conflict can only take place when the just rights of the Armenians of Artsakh are met, based on principles of international law, self-determination. And then and only then we can speak of resolution, final resolution of conflict, which is an interest of the people that are actually living there.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
We have a question from Andy. Andy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just real quick. So why do you think for the historical lesson, that was incredible. Why do you think the Minsk group hasn't done anything? Simple one. Oh, no.
Andy.
Okay. Okay.
Did you hear that? I don't know.
That's it. Yeah, I did. I actually did. Why? Andy is saying, why hasn't Minsk group done anything? Well, thanks for the question, Andy. I respectfully disagree. Minsk group, the co-chairs have actually said we have to restart the negotiations, and like I said, like we will restart those negotiations pretty soon, and it's going to happen. And guess what? They will do a lot. Once those negotiations restart, they're gonna, for example, like I said, when Aliyev signed under documents that said, we're going towards negotiated non-military settlement, and he actually broke that. He actually signed that. He's willing to, continue with the path of negotiated peaceful settlement. Then he actually turns around.
Aren't they arguing that we broke it?
No. Not the Minsk group. I mean, Azeris can say whatever, Aliyev can say whatever he wants, Andy, but the Minsk group doesn't have that view. The OSCE Minsk group co-chairs don't have that view. And let me tell you another very interesting and important thing. Aliyev, to show to as a propaganda piece, he actually invited a bunch of ambassadors that are with credentials in Baku from different countries, and the three OSCE Minsk group co-chairs, Russia, France, and United States, they did not attend to that meeting of ambassadors in Shushi, citing that since the conflict is not settled, we will not venture into a city of Shushi whose status is yet to be determined. This was a very important signal and message to the Aliyev regime that Minsk OSCE group is not favoring what he has done. There is no military solution to the final settlement of the conflict.
So realistically, just a pony on that answer. So what do you think when we go back to the negotiating table, what would possibly be, thrown on the table, so to speak? Like what could be a possible solution to this that you think? I mean, you're a historian, right? So we can kind of look at this from a historical perspective and try to kind of analyze it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I mean, I'm not going to predict, but like I said, most importantly, the Minsk group has made it clear, Annie, that basically when we speak of self-determination, obviously the self-determination of Artsakh people is ultimately, independence, and ultimately, after that, who knows, but most importantly, the right for self-determination of the people which make up the majority of this territory, who happen to be Armenian, has been fixed, inscribed by the Minsk OSCE group. So if the people themselves are led in a democratic way through a referendum, which they actually have met, and that is recognized by the Azeri side as well, they have that right. It's enshrined in international law. And this is what the Minsk OSCE group actually supports. You can't, what Aliyev and Azeri side is doing is basically saying, I'm going to use military to enforce my own vision on this region. If I have to drive Armenians away, kill them, I will do it. And the Minsk OSCE group is saying, no, this is not how international law works. You have to respect the rights of the people that are living on this land.
Yeah, that's true. Everyone, we have only a few minutes left. We've been on for over 2 hours now. And,
which is great.
Yeah, and Gevork is in Armenian. I know it's getting late over there. I do want to mention a few things before we end the show. You can Gevork has an amazing website which is called ArmenianHighland.com. Some amazing articles. I think you cover pretty much everything as far as history, and I have a lot of studying to do, or we have a lot of studying to do. Also, the Gevork has. And I've ordered these myself. He has 2 books. First one is the 10 Outstanding Armenian Kings, and then another one called 10 Outstanding Armenian Queens. They are on Amazon. If you guys are interested, please go ahead and purchase it to educate yourself. Gevork, you want to mention anything about those?
Yeah, I just want to point out why. Thank you. It was more like those are by my good friend Artakh and I translated them into English. So those are his books. I translated. It was like he was a friend. I respect him a lot. Unfortunately, we lost him as during this COVID pandemic. He just passed away so sadly in October of last year. Can you imagine, during the war of all things? So we lost him. It was a dear friend, Artakh Movsisyan, Dr. Artakh Movsisyan. So that was my humble way of paying my, homage to this great historian, a colleague. So yes, but most importantly, those 2 are obviously, they're not like definitive volumes on Armenian history, but they will give you a lot. 10 Outstanding Armenian Kings and 10 Outstanding Armenian Queens. Look that up for Amazon. They will give you like an important backdrop to, for you to dive in more into Armenian history, So it's like an important stepping stone in that regard, those 2 books. And make sure to buy them in English because they're available in Armenian as well. So make sure
I was just going to mention that. Yeah, get the English version.
Yeah.
So again, make sure you check out the website ArmenianHighland.com. As far as anything else you want to mention before we wrap this up?
No, I'm just very much thankful for the opportunity. Again, my honor and pleasure. And thank you guys for doing this, Vahe and Mike. You guys are great. And, I hope more Armenians realize what great work you're doing, and just people at large. I mean, it's just, even non-Armenian, our friends, God bless them. It's like, our history is such a fascinating thing. And the more you guys share, what you're a very important voice. Let me just say, and I hope this voice resonates all over the world. Just Armenian diaspora worldwide picks it up, and and you need to be supported in your own right. So hopefully, as they see how much of yourselves input into this, they start supporting you in so many ways that they can, in different ways that they can.
Thank you.
So yeah.
Well, we're doing the best we can, and we're proud of the show, and we're thankful from people like yourself and
humbled.
Humbled by Dr. Van Setyan, who he's a co-host, but he's obviously very busy with especially this COVID situation right now, and he's dealing with the Native American society. I think he works in the healthcare industry as well. But a couple of other things I want to mention. If you guys heard our last show, there is the project that we're doing with Bobok Animation in Gyumri, where we donated computers for the two labs that we're opening up, which kids will get to learn 3D animation for free, which will eventually secure them a job in the studios. And
we'll also bring in a lot of outsourcing work from the United States and other relevant countries that have a, quite a prominence when it comes to, media arts and whatnot.
And we basically have about $20,000, and we're trying to get up to 35. We've already donated a bunch of it. They started the process over there in Gyumri. And if you are interested in helping out, you can go to miasin.org/Bobok and donate. Any amount helps. This is a great project, and this is eventually going to help us to take what we do with the sculptures, production-wise, design-wise, to Armenia. So that's the thing. And also always visit us at medherosner.com if you're interested in what we do with the sculptures, the collectibles, those from whatever sculpture you purchase. We do donate $30 to miasin.org, who, by the way, is the organization that helps the families who've been displaced during the war. They help with the soldiers to recover. So it's an amazing organization. Again, that's miasin.org. You can just Google it. You'll find them. And having said that, our next episode, our next guest will be Dr. Christina Maranci, who is a great historian, and we're going to talk about the Armenian arts and architecture in the medieval era. So again, I want to thank you, Gevork, for doing this. Hopefully we'll have you again soon to talk about a different subject. For everybody who missed it in the beginning, we will have this up tomorrow on all the major podcast platforms, so you can go ahead and listen to it. Subscribe, share, get the word out there, listen to our previous episodes. We want this to become a huge movement.
Get involved too. We also have a website. You can email us, any questions you guys have, any suggested topics that you guys might want us to discuss in the future. We're very open to it.
If you have questions you want us to answer on the podcast, you can always email us, which is pod@medherosner.com. It's spelled just the way you hear it. And then you can also on Instagram at medherosner, you can send us a message. We're very active. We'll take your question and answer it on the next show. If you had a question that you couldn't get to today, we can cover that next week. And we might do the clubhouse again with Christina.
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
see. So that show we're going to be recording next Saturday, 10 a.m. So we'll see if she is open to the clubhouse. We'll go ahead and let everyone know about it. Again, thank you very much. And until next time.